Yes, I think that it's very important to actually emphasize that there are so many employees out there that are actually doing this hard work, as well as just thinking about your own experience whenever you turn out to vote, right? It's always unfortunate if there is something that seems questionable, or you have a really long wait, or we have some of these instances like we've just talked about where votes need to be recounted, or maybe there was a delay in the process. But focus on the fact that those are a small number of cases and people are working to correct them. And I think it's really important to remind a lot of the voters of that, because we have so much misinformation that's out there on social media. And so if you hear a story, oh, this is something that happened to my friend when they went to vote, and that seems suspicious, that can really sow a seed of doubt. And especially if that person doesn't also hear about all the stories of all the people working diligently out there very early in the morning to man the polls, to make sure that our ballots are counted, then they're only getting that one side of the story, and it can really sow doubt in the system.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, that brings up a really great point in why we have Verify in part. So we have a Verify segment, which is a lot of fact checking and actually going to primary sources and getting the real information, just because there is so much misinformation. And in fact, we should say disinformation out there. And we see this with large events. So for example, an election, we saw it post-Helene, where there were so many false claims circulating. And in some cases, it is somebody with a particular agenda. They're trying to maybe say that, officials aren't doing their part, or they're not being transparent. In some cases, we are seeing these are actually foreign agents. We actually had the FBI talking about how they recently disrupted, I want to say back in September, I believe it was, I think it was 32 domains that were linked to misinformation surrounding the election, and they were able to track it out of Russia. So yeah, I would just urge folks, if they have any claims that they're seeing, to send them to us, to our team, verify@wcnc.com. We will gladly look into those, and folks can also check out our Verify section on wcnc.com and the WCNC Charlotte mobile app to kind of look at our past reporting, just to see if there's something that we've already talked about. I guess my next question that kind of leads out of this, and it ties into something that Ben said earlier, just kind of like a cautionary tale as results start to come in super, super early here, is not to put too much stake in the trends that we're seeing very early on. And I think it ties in a bit to some folks maybe, the red mirage, thinking about the red mirage or the blue mirage. And when you start to see results changing throughout the evening in a drastic way, they might feel like this is an example or, an illustration of, something dubious going on with the election process. What are you looking at? What are you seeing as far as trends that we could expect? Red mirage, blue mirage in North Carolina and other states that are important for folks to know about?
Yes, I think that that's going to be really important, because I think this was a source of a lot of confusion last time, right? If your state seems to be red and then suddenly shifts blue, or vice versa, that's a big surprise. Like, why did the results suddenly change? And back in 2020 especially, you had a lot more Democrats who were doing vote by mail, and so that's one of the reasons that occurred. So if we have a similar trend, although it may not be the same case without the pandemic, then there may not be as much partisanship in who votes by mail. There may not be quite the same trend with there being a different partisanship to the votes coming in later. But if there is, that's maybe not something nefarious, but just a different pattern in, I saw data the other day showing that older voters voted early on in early voting, and then younger voters voted later on. If something like that happened, where younger voters got their absentee ballots in later and then they voted more Democratic, then that could change the results as different demographics or different, people who live in different parts of the state come in, and we add those into the vote totals.
Got to ask you about this too, because electronics technology has obviously advanced. It's been used, even Dominion voting machines use electronics. And I'm curious to know from you also, because a lot of people there's been a claim that voting machines maybe shouldn't be used, we should use paper ballots. Everything is backed up on paper, though, that we're seeing electronically. So just because we're not necessarily seeing the physical paper ballots doesn't mean that they're not backed by what we're seeing electronically, right? Can you talk a little bit about what we're seeing technologically around the United States, also maybe here in North Carolina with casting those votes?
Yeah, I mean, obviously every state is going to be using different types of systems, but there's a lot of work to make those secure, as well as the fact that, as you said, there's going to be paper records as well. I know, for example, when I personally went to vote, you use the machine, but it prints out a piece of paper.
Exactly.
Right.
Yes.
And so they have information that they can look at to back that up.
Okay.
And so even if there was some kind of concern, they could look at that sort of thing to see if there was any kind of discrepancy. Because of course technology could theoretically have glitches or problems, and we wouldn't want that to happen. But again, kind of back to what we said earlier, folks, if you were having a problem with the voting machine, report that to the people who are working there, and hopefully they're going to get that taken care of. And then additionally, well, if they found that the results seemed odd, well, then that's something that could hopefully be investigated with those additional physical records.
Great answer.
Yeah, and something interesting I'll just add, it's not a question, it's something that I found out and I thought was kind of interesting in interviewing Michael Dickerson, who runs the elections here in Mecklenburg County. I mean, he's just very accessible, and he just has a lot of information anytime we just want to ask him any little thing about elections.
Always around,
and he mentioned, because I did a verify on what sort of elements of your voter profile are public, and obviously how you vote is not public information, but there are a lot of other things that can be discovered about your voter profile, like which party you're registered with, and your address, and whether you voted in a certain election. But he mentioned that they actually end up purging, at least in Mecklenburg County, a lot of the information about how people voted after 22 months. I think he said by law he's legally allowed to do that, and he does, because he doesn't want to complicate anything further. So I just thought that was an interesting point about backing up the system and how long they keep that stuff on file.
There are rules and laws that these folks follow. And I have to say thank you to our poll workers, our election judges, our volunteers. I can't imagine just the workload and really the effort that starts after the polls close. There's a lot of work that obviously happens before, but a lot of work that happens after. So we're getting a lot of these